This is our week 6 Infinity Squadron Zoom discussion. I wanted to start with one quote from the book that I thought was really interesting. It's, "We do not passively react, but rather act to change the world around us." And I feel like that kind of encompasses ethical leadership. Um, it's also, the book talked about moral sensitivity, judgment, character, and motivation. And I feel like those are all key components to having ethics that shape leaders. I feel like you have to trust them. They do have to be role models, and I feel like trust is really big, and that also just reflects like their daily decisions, any decisions that they make, which also ties into public leadership. I feel like in anyone in like the public eye at all, every decision that they make, we highly judge it, and just it's a reflection of, we like take it as a reflection of who they are. So I feel like that was like really telling in this chapter, especially. It's just like all the little decisions really shape how they choose and just their more moral character.
Thanks, Adriana. I think that when I read through the information presented on ethics, what I came up with as a definition that worked for me was the idea that ethics is a standard of moral conduct, that it includes judgments about whether our behavior is right or wrong. I honestly think that it's a tricky conversation because, we get in a discussion about like ethics and everybody goes, yep, right or wrong, black or white. But I think that, if we're talking about like a moral decision or a code of conduct, a moral code of conduct, there's so many personal beliefs in that. I think people's ethics are largely based on what their worldview is, and a collective right or wrong, making a collective right or wrong about that is a really tricky thing. So I think I think it clearly influences leadership. I think that one of the things it talked about is that leadership was our mechanism for influencing others in accomplishing either changing their state of mind or their activity. And so whatever our ethical code is that we bring to that, we're asking people to change their behaviors and their thoughts, their ideas, but based on what our ethical code is. And honestly, when we start looking at public leadership, I think that discussion is it's getting more and more difficult, frankly. I read I read a pin in our Yellow Dig this week, and I'm not going to comment in Yellow Dig because I don't want to perpetuate a discussion based on this. But the discussion was something like, I'm not going to talk about politics, but talking about politics, and then went on to talk about behavior that they called out as being unethical. And our book talks a little bit about this too, like unethical behavior. And I think that while maybe unpopular or disliked, I think they even, it was like a word I could have plucked off like the headlines from the news, clearly, who I feel like are not ethical characters at this point, but it was something about dismantling our democracy or something. I thought, well, you might not like it, but I feel like our democracy is all right, and what, there's no law being broken, it's not lying or cheating or stealing, it's just not popular or liked, and so we as human beings are going to have to step up and start to decide, is this something I don't like, or is it ethical? What is a code of ethics? And what I came away from this chapter really thinking is it is so important for us, if we're going to be leaders, to be clear about what efficacy really is, not like popular ideas of the day. So that's all I got.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Cheryl. I kind of had some similar ideas. For me, I saw that the main influence of ethics is that you can have a different perspective, or sorry, getting lost in my notes. That as a leader, you can have different ethical perspectives depending on what different approach that you have. And after learning about the various perspectives, I don't think that they're oh, this one is the right way that someone should be an ethical leader. For some examples, the textbook talked about like Kant's perspective and how he discusses like morals over consequences. And I think it has like some good sentiment in it, but I think like people and ideas are more complex than just like, oh, this is what's morally right. Like you can't use that for every single decision, because in some cases you might think like, oh yes, it's morally right, but you have to think about like like the other variables that come into play. And on the opposite of that, like the utilitarianism, it talks a lot about like consequences, and it kind of remind me of like the trolley dilemma, where it's like, oh, you could pull the lever and kill one person over like a bunch of people, and some people might be like, oh yeah, that's obviously the right decision, but in the end, like one person is still dying. And so I don't think that in all these different perspectives, there isn't one thing that one person should choose. And I think it's really important as a leader to recognize that. And it's important to know yourself and your own values, because that's what guides your morals and you as a leader of what you think is most important. And so like, even in politics or not in politics, it's important as a leader to like let people know what's important to you, so they know when you go on to make decisions, like, this is what I think is moral, this is what I know. And so you can understand like their way of thinking, that like, oh, I personally might not think that that's the same like ethical or morals that I would do, but like this is what is most important to them, so I can understand like their perspective on things. And if you guys, any of you have seen the show like The Good Place, it talks a lot about like ethics and whatnot. And I haven't finished the show yet, but it says like there really is no like one ethical like decision, because there are also like so many decisions that have lasting effects that like we won't even know about. Like we could make a decision and it could affect so many other things that we just will never know. So yeah.
Thanks, Courtney.
Thank you, Courtney. Yeah, I agree with all three of you. I think ethics is it's a very broad term, because it could mean so much. When I think of ethics, just like at work in particular, I just think of like the honesty and the morals of the leadership, and basically what they make their decisions based upon, that are legal decisions and that are not going to impact someone's rights in any way. But I think, Cheryl kind of touched base on it too. I think right now we've been dealing with ethics way more and politically than we ever have, because no matter which leader we're referring to, whether it be President Trump, whether it be our governor in whatever state you live in, they're making decisions that there's going to be half the population that does not agree with them, and the other half, that do. And I feel like that leader really has to understand that you're going to disappoint somebody, but it's up to you to make the decision that's morally right for the majority of the population. Because I know, for example, for us being in California, a lot of people are disagreeing with Gavin Newsom right now, because they feel like you're closing things down, we're going to lose money and whatnot. And I can understand that, some people, that's their paycheck. And if they close down their shop, that's it. But then also people are thinking, but my health is way more important than me going bankrupt. So both sides, me as a person, I could understand both sides. But I feel like I couldn't make that decision, because either way, you're going to disappoint somebody or you're going to hurt somebody in some way. But it's just, I think it's important for those leaders to explain, this is why I'm making this decision. If it's, and I think they have to think ahead, saying like, if we close down these shops, we're going to have a plan in place to help you, survive this time when we close down, giving those. So at least the people you are going to disappoint, give them some hope, give them some reason to believe like, okay, you're making a decision we don't agree with, but you're giving me something. I think is truly important in our time right now, because I feel like we have so much, going back and forth with this rope of people just going at it, and a lot of hate going on, and it's really nasty right now. But I feel like, we hope that these leaders are doing what's in the best interest of their people, and not just because this is what I just believe, and that's just my personal opinion. It's just more of, you're doing this for the people and not just yourself. So that's what my
Optimistic. I like it.
Thanks, Jessica. So, yeah, I also agree with everybody. Everything all kind of connects together, I feel like. ethical decisions are driven by your own personal morals, I feel like. And so I think for leadership, it's key to align those with your organization to be successful in that particular role. I think that it's going to depend where you're at and what you're doing at that particular time. But I think aligning those two, your value, your personal values with what the organizational values are in order to be successful in leading that. Because if they don't line up, maybe that's not the right organization for you, because trying to change your own personal morals is harder than trying to make them work with what's there at the organization already. So yeah, I just think that, I'm sorry, I'm getting lost in my notes as well. Moral behaviors lead to ethical decisions, and this shows respect for the organization and for your followers. Again, leading by example and putting that standard out there for your followers is key, because if you're not showing that you're going to respect the ethics of making those decisions, why should anybody else? It's kind of like a trickle effect. Everybody's going to kind of follow on and say, I can get away with this. How far can I push it? The leaders are not holding them to that standard. So I think communicating that standard and what the expectation is of that organization is really kind of key. I've seen both sides of it, good ethical decision making versus bad. Working in a business office, I think it's very important, and we do a lot of training on it. And something we kind of always start with is because it's referring to like money and using the department like credit card. Like, do you want to see yourself in the news? If you're questioning the decision you're making, is it something that's going to get you put in the news? Because if it is, then it's probably not the best decision. And so that's kind of like a little funny thing that people can kind of refer to, because it really makes sense. Like, is this going to get me in trouble? Well, probably I shouldn't do it. That was my take.